Hello and welcome to Story Behind the Story, where romance readers and authors connect. I'm Reese Rand, author of sexy, emotional romantic fiction featuring lots of family drama, surprising secrets, and a cast of complicated, sometimes messy characters. And I am very excited this week that we will be chatting with author Denny S. Bryce about her book, Wild Women and the Blues. So I'm excited to get into the topic of not only the book itself, but the style in which she's told the story, which is a dual timeline. So we'll be discussing that today. So before we get into that, the next show is going to be in October, and I've got a few things lined up, but I didn't set them up or schedule them below. So if you make sure you subscribe below, you will be notified when the next shows are updated, so you'll know who's going to be coming on next as guest. Also, if you have someone that you'd like to recommend as a guest that you'd like to see me chat with, be sure to put that in the comments, or you can message me wherever it is that we are connected, to let me know who you'd like to hear me talk to or see me talk to next. So, but I will also be this Friday making a date with you for a chat with the Boozy Book Broads. We're going to be talking about Just a Little Married, which is coming out soon. So the launch of the final book in my Moonlight Ridge trilogy with me, Karen Booth, and Joss Wood. And so the Boozy Book Broads and I are going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about writing for series romance for Harlequin, as well as grown folks romance, which I'm really into right now, writing and reading. And we're going to be making and drinking Boulevardiers, which is a drink that is in that book, Just a Little Married. So that's going to be fun, or it's going to be wild. So, make sure you're there to find out. So that is that. And then at the end of this month, on the 29th, which is the day after that book comes out, Just a Little Married, we're going to be doing a release party on Brown Book Series channel, Shay Baby's channel. Karen, Joss, and I will be chatting with her at 2:00 in the afternoon Eastern. And then we're going to have a party in the Racy Reads party room from 7 to 10 p.m. So you'll see more about all of that. I just wanted to give you a heads up on those things. So now I am excited to, again, well, first of all, welcome. If you're here, thank you for joining us. If you have not already subscribed, be sure to subscribe. And if you enjoy the show, by all means, hit like, because it helps other people find the show as well. And we appreciate that. So we're going to get right into it. And also, if you haven't been here before and you don't know, it's a very interactive show. So definitely share your comments in the comment boxes. And if you're watching us from Facebook, make sure that you go into the link within the post and make sure you give StreamYard permission to show your face. Otherwise, or show who you are. I'm sorry, show your name. Otherwise, we will be able to see your comment. We won't know who it comes from. So that is all of the housekeeping stuff. So let's get right into talking to Denny. So welcome to the show, Denny. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, how are you doing there? Hi, everybody who's here. I'm very thrilled to be here. I'm a little surprised. I'll go into my hair story a little bit later, but I freaked out looking at myself because my hair is almost like black. This is not. This is what happens with self-dyes, but okay.
You're talking about self-dyes, but I can't tell you how many times I have gone to a shop and come out looking like Ronald McDonald, for real. So
anything is possible. Yes, I know.
Yes. And both times I told them, I'm like, my hair is like really porous and like you can't leave it on as long as the box says, oh, I've done this so many times. It's gonna be perfect. Both times I was looking like Ronald McDonald. So
let's not go down the hair road. We can be here quite a bit talking about that.
So for anyone who's not familiar with you, please tell readers a little bit about who you are and what you write.
Okay. Well, Denny S. Bryce, that's my name. And, and I write historical fiction that supposedly borders a little bit towards the literary side, but mostly commercial. And I have Wild Women in the Blues is my debut novel. I've been playing around or active in the writing community for a number of years, taking tons of classes, hanging out with tons of people. And so I've had the opportunity to meet and interact with so many different authors who write everything from romance to historical fiction to literary fiction, you name it. I've had an opportunity to talk to them about books, about what they love about writing, what they love about reading. That has led me to be able to do some other things. I've written articles for Frolic and USA Today and Harper's Bazaar. Currently, I am a book critic for NPR. In fact, a couple of my reviews will come into conversation when we start talking about multiple timelines and or dual timelines. Today, my review of Colson Whitehead's new novel, Harlem Shuffle, went live. And it's an amazing book, by the way. Amazing.
I saw that and I'm like, okay. First of all, just the author, first of all, and then the title right away grabbed me with both of those. So I was like, oh my goodness.
Different tone for him. It's a very different world he's tackling. More, it's the 1960s, but it's also it's a heist story. Hotel Teresa, one of the classic hotels of Harlem, the Waldorf of Harlem. Don't get me started because my history, it's like historical research will get you lost in the past.
Yeah.
And I have pulled right back to current day very often because I'm like, isn't it 1925?
I can understand why from when I was reading the book. So I totally get that. So a quick hello to everybody who's been saying hello to us, like Lisa Marshall. Yeah. Thank you so much. And Veronica asked if I enjoyed my break. Yes, I did, because I was posting last week that I had a ton of stuff that I was supposed to be doing, but I had taken a whole weekend off, and I was been watching tennis and all that kind of stuff. So because sometimes you need that break to just pull back. And Laura said, love your earrings. And actually, I forgot to tell you, Denny, that I wore these in honor of Wild Women in the Blues because it's the music symbol. And then the heart, I wore the heart, romance and music, okay?
Okay. I love that.
Love it. So, yes, I was like, when I saw those, I was like, you know what? I'm having Denny on. I need to have some kind of music.
I have on some old big bobbly things.
I was like, I gotta have some theme earrings. Got to. And I just saw a comment from there she is. Tam Jernigan. Caitlin says hello, Reese and Denny.
I see, yeah.
Appreciate you so much.
I see Angela Anderson.
Hi, yes. Yes, and Laura, I think you're talking about Denny's books. Yes, I love these covers. I wanted to ask about this cover in a minute because it is so gorgeous. So gorgeous. Mm-hmm. Love it, love it, love it. And Angela, hey. Yes, Denny is amazing, right? So, like you said, you are a good idea, Lisa. I saw your comment about suggestion, and I like that idea. So thank you. I'm gonna write it down. So, Denny, like you said, this is your debut book, and yet you
6 months old,
critical acclaim for it, and prior to publication, even. So, tell us a little bit about the journey to writing this book.
Well, as I said, I think that my key word for me over the past 10 years that I've been hanging out in the writing world is patience, because I've definitely taken my time to get to the point where I said, okay, I'm ready to have an agent. I'm ready to get out there on submission. I'm ready for this, that, and the other. And then the book sells, and then the pandemic comes. I had 3 different release dates that kept getting pushed because the world was, sideways. And all of that is to say that it ended up being the best possible time period, I feel. As I said, my book has been out 6 months. And what really kicked off, early reviews, definitely very exciting. But the first list that we got on, the most anticipated historical fiction of 2021, was Oprah's. And that set the tone, if you will, for the next several months. And so we had a lot of attention, and it was very exciting. Very, that's the part of this whole process that I was not as ready for, in a way, or was surprised for. Not so much the actual publicity, promotional elements, because I've worked in marketing and PR for a number of years, but the reader reaction response to the book and the story. I mean, I've gotten letters, I've gotten book club interactions that have been amazing. People have dressed up and posted on Instagram. Just a lot of things that you just don't expect or think about. And then once they start happening, you're just thrilled by the entire experience.
That's so exciting.
Yeah.
Whenever readers are really into a story or into your world, that is just such an exciting thing for a writer to feel like, okay, they really, really got it. But this book too, for you, didn't you win an award for this book, or you were nominated for an award for this book prior to?
Oh yeah, well, in because of my very past, I was involved in RWA for a number of years. That's the Romance Writers of America. And my story originally, Wild Women in the Blues, was originally a historical romance. What is it called? The shortest version you can have, a novella. And I met, and it was in response to a call from a small publisher. And then when I sent it to another publisher, they were like, we love this, but it needs to be a book. And then it won a contest in Chicago, not Chicago, I get my cities messed up, but in Washington, D.C., Washington Romance Writers of America, it won a contest. And the agents that I met with, because that's, how those contests go, you win and you get to talk to agents, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, you know what? I think this should be historical fiction. And I'm like, okay. I'm very pliable. You indicate interest. And I'm like, sure, I can do that. But this one gal from the night agency, in fact, she suggested that I read. She gave me some books to read. And I fell in love with these books, and they were all dual storyline. That was the Ariel. What is Ariel Lawton? Her book was the wife, the mistress, and the maid was the name of the book, and it was just structurally, I just loved it. And so there were several other books, and the next thing you know, I'm sitting there, oh man, I'm gonna do this, Okay, that was 7 years ago. Okay,
right.
So the first book took me 6 years to write. The second one is coming out in a minute, or so it feels like, the way people are asking me for stuff, has 18 months, and so different, but that's okay, because I'm more confident now. Not super confident, I'm filled with confidence, as every writer knows. Every book is another journey from day one, It's like, oh, have I ever written a sentence?
Every single time.
You know, that that's a whole different conversation because that messes with me. Some of my favorite authors, they all say the same thing. Every book is like, every book is the
Yes.
same sort of upheaval, internal craziness,
Yeah.
and looking at your writing going, why? Easier.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. You would think, like
you
I would think like 20 books in or whatever, it would be easier, but and some books are easier than others. Like
Well,
but there are
hopefully the
some that are
blessing
just
will
like,
pass my way sooner than later because I have right now, well, the one that's coming out in April, In the Face of the Sun. I'm working, I'll get my copy edits for that tomorrow. So boom, boom, boom. As soon as I get done with that, I'm working on my William Morrow book, which is a biographical historical fiction. Then after that, I have another 2 books with Kensington. So it's like, keep it going.
yeah.
Just keep it going.
Yes, that's the
Yay.
thing. That's what we want, right? As writers, to be working writers who have all of these contracts and stuff. But the reality of it is a little bit different. It's just, it's a lot, and you definitely have to keep
Whole lot. And
track
then
of
you
all
go,
of the balls juggling in the air at any given time. So, but yeah, I have every confidence that you'll do it. So, so tell us
yay.
a little bit more about the premise, the unique premise of this story, and how you came up with
Okay.
it.
Okay. Well, I can tell you that there were 2 inspirations for Wild Women in the Blues. My maternal grandmother, she came to this country from Kingston, Jamaica in 1923, arrived in New York City, thought she was going to live in New York City, and ended up in a small town in Ohio called Uricksville, Ohio. And that should
Is
be a
that
book.
right? Is it anywhere near Cleveland? That's where I'm from.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I spent time in Cleveland because I went to Cleveland Heights High. Go Tiger. Um,
I did not know that. Wow.
and I've lived many places. Keep on the move.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
yeah, so that she was when I was a little girl, she'd have all of these photos and these different things all through the house, and I was very inquisitive and very nosy. And so I'd ask her questions, and she'd tell me all these stories about, when she first came to this country and the cars and the fashions. And she was a sewer. And so she had the sewing machine that is in the book. I talk
Mm.
about a Singer sewing machine, a certain model, and she just kept everything, so
Wow.
even though I wasn't hanging out with her until, many, many years later. Nonetheless, that sewing machine was still there. The stand-up piano was still in the sunroom. Just things that were from her early youth that she just hung on to. She lived on a farm, so there was no point in doing a lot of different things, all the time. And so she was an inspiration. And then the other thing that I used to do in my younger days, I was a professional dancer in New York City. And as with any professional dancer, I also waited on tables. And there was this place that I worked at in the village called the Cookery. And the Cookery was owned by a guy named Barney Josephson. And Barney Josephson also owned, many years earlier, Cafe Society, which is the place where Billie Holiday first sang Strange Fruit. So
Wow.
he was like in his 90s when I was working at this place. And
Wow.
um, one of the main people, one of the main entertainers, because he was bringing back a lot of the stars from the 20s and 30s, and this was in the 80s,
Mm.
um, was a gal named Alberta Hunter. And Alberta Hunter was a huge blues star in the 20s and 30s. And she's also in Wild Women in the Blues. And I used to spend time with her when she was in her 80s making a comeback. And she was just very cool. And, my job was to bring her tea. When I was working on the weekends she worked. I also made a lot of money on the weekends she worked because she's very popular. So I managed to work almost every weekend she worked. But so those two women and that history that at the time, believe me, I had no idea I was going to be a writer. I'd always loved to write, but when I was in New York, it was always about dancing and singing and all this other stuff that was incredibly crazy. And so those two women inspired the book. The book evolved over time. As I mentioned, 6 years. I will say that the first chapter in 1925 has not changed that much over time. It's pretty much the same. It's definitely the same opening paragraphs. And so that sort of strikes me as funny. The 2015 storyline, because as you point out, it's dual storyline, was incorporated, what became a part of the process once I decided to write a bigger book. And so the Sawyer storyline, I really wanted to do, write a young African-American male who was not necessarily, he's sort of a beta guy and just in a lot of pain from some tragedies in his life and his own insecurities and what have you. So the opportunity to write about him and juxtapose his journey to Honore Dalcour's journey, and Honore starts like Spitfire. She's coming in the room and everybody's going to know something's up. And it's almost like their journeys start at opposite places and then sort of fold in on each other and go out the other way. And that was a deliberate decision on my part. I really wanted to have that sort of, interaction between the two timelines. So what else can I say? Chicago, 1925, Louis Armstrong. Nightclub, the night scene, the action, the Black Belt, also known as Bronzeville. There was, of course, racism, prejudice, poverty, all of the things that you can imagine that was a part of the scene during that time period. But also there were people who were living their lives and having a fabulous time doing it. So that part of the story I also wanted to make sure was on the page as well.
Well, and that was a perfect segue into the next thing that I was going to ask you about, and that is that a lot of the book is set at the Dreamland Cafe in Chicago, circa 1925. And more often than not, when we hear about clubs in that period and stuff, we talk so much about New York and the Harlem Renaissance and what have you. So we don't talk about as much about, those kind of clubs in other parts of the country. So tell us more about the Dreamland Cafe and what made it so special and why you chose it for your setting.
Well, very much a part of the themes in the story are about dreams, be it the horrible dreams that saddle Sawyer, but also the dreams that Honore has about her future. She is hell-bent on fulfilling her dreams. The Dreamland Cafe existed in the 1920s on the corner. The actual address was 3520 State Street. That's on the corner of 35th and State. Right now it's a Walgreens. Don't go.
I was going to say it's everything.
And it was, there's a lot of history about it. Once Storyville was in New Orleans, and Storyville had a real strong jazz scene. That's where Louis Armstrong was born. Lots of stuff happening out of there that was so authentic to the early days of jazz. But Storyville was closed down, forcibly closed down in the turn of the century, maybe 1905, around that period of time, maybe a little bit later. So you have these fantastic young musicians and they get on that train, and that train takes you from New Orleans straight up to Chicago. And you had the Pullman Porters sharing copies of the Chicago Defender, And the Chicago Defender was like, hey, life is great, life is grand, things are happening in Chi-Town, city with big shoulders, come on up, you can get out of Jim Crow, change your life. Well, you can change your life to a certain extent, but it was better in the North for many people to come up, and the musicians just followed the path. Another element that helped build upon the mystique of what they called the stroll and the jazz scene, the entertainment scene, was gambling. And gambling specifically was something called policy gambling. And policy gambling, very similar to what is now known as the lottery. And those people who built, and now let me share that policy gambling was in New York, was in a lot of the major cities, but it was, Chicago always has a flair, it always, wants to take whatever it does up a notch because it has that second city-itis thing it has to get over. And so you had people like the Bing brothers and the Bing Bank and all of that commerce that ended up being a part of the Chicago scene during the 1920s, 30s, and 40s was built on gambling, because some of these banks were also the funded the gambling machine. So yeah, it's a very and oh, the other thing that I love about the little historical tidbits I was able to dig out was the fact that that Capone, and I kind of used it in the story, Capone, of course, wanted to have his fingers in every pie, but there were 4 policy kings in Chicago, and they were like, no, we'll buy your bootleg liquor, but you will not touch our gambling. And so there was an agreement made. I don't know who was bad enough to come out and just say, oh no, Capone, you stay where you are and we'll, but that was part of the deal. And I kind of used that in the story because one of Capone's guys that was a fictional character in my book was trying to, circumvent that. And that became a problem for my poor Honore. But she was like, nah, you're not going to do this to me. So that's some background. I got a little deep in the research process there.
Wow. So fascinating. I'm always fascinated by that whole period. And so just hearing all of those different, that's one of the things that is actually one of those things that's on my list that I really want to do. And there is a historical story set in that period that I really want to write. And even just doing research, just regular research for a contemporary story, I can get lost down a rabbit hole. So I can't even imagine how deeply down the hole I could fall doing historical research.
Every time I dig in, I mean, it's initially just so much fun because I am a history buff. I am not a historian. I minored in history in college, but when I was in college, I think that most of that meant a lot of World War II. Or so it felt, it wasn't, I had some sensibilities of African American studies, but not that much. And so I just dove in. And plus I've read a lot of history books because I like history. And then I fell in love with historical novels. So I just started talking to historical authors, historical fiction authors, and just saying, what do you do? What happens next? You gather all this information, and then how do you organize it? I was like,
there's a lot of information together. Yeah. We have a question, and I'm not sure. So, Miss Loretta, you said, repeat, please. What is the author's name? And are you talking about one of the books that Denny mentioned If so, let us know, and we'll try to get
I'm
an
trying to
answer.
remember. Have I mentioned any books yet?
I remember you mentioned Colson Whitehead and
Oh
Harlem
yes,
Shuffle. That
Colson
was much earlier
Whitehead.
in, so I'm not
Yeah.
sure if that was the book being referenced, but if whatever, we'll try to get an answer for you. So let me know.
Okay.
So before I ask anything else, let's talk about this gorgeous cover right here, because it is just the minute I saw it, I'm like, I have to have the physical book because it's just so pretty. So tell us a little bit about the cover and how it came to be.
Very exciting. The process, it's a very interesting process with covers. I've only worked with one publisher on covers, and I just recently did a cover reveal for my second book. But with this book, we had initially 4 treatments, and those 4 treatments were not hitting on anybody's list of phenomenal. And
what a delicate way to say
it. But then something happened, and one day a piece of art was sent through, and it was this gal. It was just her. Wait a minute, I don't even know where the camera is. And it was just her. And everybody was like, well, we're done.
Yes.
And that was it. Now I will throw out some names. Cover design is by Christine Mills, and she is the executive. I think she is either executive director, or I know she's departmental head of all of their art, covers, graphics, what have you, creative director for Kensington Books, for overall Kensington Publishing, excuse me. And the cover illustration is by a gal named Sarah Knott. And they just did a beautiful job. And I mean, and I think that one thing that I have always felt, another in the back of my mind, I guess, is that so often the 1920s are equated totally to, Hemingway. And, that story, that's the big 1920s thing that everybody thinks of. And it's like, African Americans, we were dressing up, we had the clothes, we had the fashion, we had the music,
gorgeous fashion.
We had so much that, and I hadn't seen that many books with African American characters in the forefront in the 20s, within the action and the glamour and everything. We've had some movies, and I know there are some books out there. I haven't read everything, God knows. But I really was excited about the opportunity to share this time period and Chicago with folks. And I just hoped there was a positive response, and it's been exciting. And the cover definitely drew attention. So yay.
Absolutely. Laura, as a matter of fact, Laura says, yes, it's making me want the physical book. I've been very happy with ebooks for years. Yeah. And I had to, I went through a period where I very rarely was reading physical books. I was mostly I went from saying I will never own an e-reader to then mostly reading ebooks. And now I've kind of swung back again to physical books. And so, like I said, this was definitely one where I was like, okay, I was in the store and I saw it. I was like, I have to have this. So for Miss Loretta, she came in late and she's on her phone. So she was asking about you. So our guest today is Denny S. Bryce. This is her debut book, Wild Women in the Blues. Yay. Historical fiction, and it is told in a dual timeline. We'll be talking about that. So welcome, Miss Loretta and MF Hopkins, who says, I just arrived. I hope I didn't miss too much. We're gonna catch you up, and you can always go back and see the playback whenever it strikes you. So no worries. She said her phone screen is tiny. I get it. I get that. Thank you for joining us anyway. And hello, Cheryl. MF Hopkins says 1920s are my fave time period in regards to clothes. Yes, I love that so much. And that actually was
I'm also in love. Okay, I have 2 other time periods that I'm messing with. Well, in my next book, it's 1928 and 1968. And I love things in 1968. But I'm really, another story I'm working on is in the 1950s, and I'm just like, the fashion is.
So that's the whole like I Love Lucy kind of look and stuff. I love.
Well, it's Ava Gardner, Dorothy Dandridge. I mean, you're okay. Got you thinking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all of those clothes are gorgeous too. I mean, I still like that was one of the things too for this book. They're like a kind of Great Gatsby party, and so that's what inspired that look. And so I love that they were able to capture that. But yes, I love those old clothes from that time period. Those time periods.
I like the boat necks from the 50s and polka dots, and then the fitted, waistline and women, the figures, of Hollywood figures at least, but most women were, size 12 and 14 and 16 were not taboo, in Hollywood, for example. Different fashion trends that, and usually the only thing I wear is jeans and a blouse. So, lately, but just to play around with clothes. And when I work on my biographical historical, I'm in the Victorian era, and talking some amazing clothes. And my gal is a princess at certain stages of her life. I'm like, she's gonna be dressed.
That's one of the things I was just actually talking to my husband about, because we watch a lot of mystery shows, but we watch some historical ones too. So one of the ones we really love that we just binged is the Frankie Drake mysteries, and it's set in Toronto in the 1920s. And I love this series. So it's called the Frankie Drake mysteries, and I love it so much because it's about these four women, and two of them are detectives and stuff, and one woman is black and wants to be a police officer, but they won't let her. So it's just they're doing so many amazing things. And it's such a well-written series, but the costumes are amazing. It's called the Frankie Drake mysteries. So good. It's a Canadian show. And another Canadian historical mystery that I love is the Murdoch mysteries. Two amazing shows. Yep, two amazing shows.
In Australia, that
Miss Fisher murder mysteries. Love that one too. And I'm so heartbroken that it's just 3 seasons. And then a movie. They did a movie after, but the costumes on that too are absolutely phenomenal.
Very awesome.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. Okay. So let's talk about the two very different protagonists through whose eyes the story is told. You have 110-year-old Honorée Dalcourt, though we get to meet her right away, like you said, in 1925, and see who she is. Yeah. And then we also meet film student Sawyer Hayes. So give us a little bit of background on each one of them.
Well, as I said about Sawyer Hayes is a young man, film student, and who is grieving a loss and is trying to get his life back on course. And he's decided that the way to do that is for him to finish something. And he's going to finish his thesis, which is a documentary on Oscar Micheaux. Oscar Micheaux is a legendary Black filmmaker. You can actually go to YouTube right now and watch Body and Soul, for example. Several of his other films are there, but Body and Soul is actually mentioned in Wild Women in the Blues, starred Paul Robeson, who was the amazing, multi-talented actor, civil rights activist, had the longest, still to this day, has the longest running Othello on Broadway. I read that someplace. This is the rabbit hole, But
you never know where you can use, you never know where it's going to come in handy, all that stuff.
Right. You're just sitting around and it's like, oh, I remember this, conversation starters. But yeah, he's really determined, but at the same time, he's struggling. He has things that he thinks he sees. He has a difficult relationship with his father. And then he thinks he can get in and out with, talking to Honoré Dalcour, the 110-year-old woman. And the way he stumbled upon her is that he was, at his grandmother's house back in Santa Monica. And he stumbles upon some photos, a reel of film, some other stuff. And he sees this woman with Louis Armstrong, with Oscar Micheaux, and on the back of the photo is a name and a telephone number. Not one of those crazy Victory, but a regular old phone number. He calls it. This is like backstory. You don't get a lot of this in the book, but he calls it, and it's a home. It's a senior facility. And so he's like, Honoré Dalcour, she's alive? Okay, let me on my way to bother my dad in Paris, because his dad is, off doing important things. He says, let me stop by and just grab this woman for a few minutes. But she's feisty, she's just trouble. She's just trouble. At that age, and she, in this time period, when she's that age, she's really more so inspired by my aunt. My aunt Hazel, I think she just turned 95 or 96, and she still drives around, Dayton, Ohio. That's where she's at, people. But anyway, she still drives every place she wants to go. I talked to her the other day, and I said, well, how are you doing? I said, what have you been doing? And my expectation is it's going to be like sitting around, 95 years old. She says, no, I went to Gladys Knight concert. And I said, okay, that makes me just feel bad. I haven't been anything. So, wow. But anyway, so she has, the character has this big energy, and the thing that she has left is her stories. She's this old and 110 years old, and she's like, look, if you want to talk to me and get some answers that you can use, you're going to have to share something with me, share something about yourself with me. And so he's like, this bargaining thing is not working for him, sort of, kind of. She riles him up, so he goes on about his business, and then he ends up coming back, and that's how things start to kick off, because from there we get both stories happening back and forth, or, a lot of time spent in the 1920s. But that frame of those conversations in Chicago, and the gal he meets there, Sawyer meets Lulu. Yeah, it's Lulu or Lula. Can't remember. This is what happened.
The minute he was calling her Blue Scrubs in the beginning, right? So the minute they met, I was like, "Yep,
there it is."
Like there it is.
He didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to do. And then he was sort of fun to put that in to put that little bit, that relationship in there. I felt it was. I just like that. I like one of the things about historical fiction. It's not romance, but relationships are so important to people's arcs. And to ignore a love story or a perspective love story, or a flirtation, if you will, is not. I don't think it's reflective of how people live. And you want to have as much for the reader to connect to as possible, and that's an important aspect of it.
I agree. And I'm going to look at some of the comments from our viewers. Cheryl said, I am someone who loves a gorgeous book cover as well, and yours is beautiful. I know I keep showing it because it is so gorgeous. It is such a gorgeous book, and it grabs you right from the beginning. When you start the book, you get right into it. So good evening to our Facebook user. If you are watching from Facebook, you have to go into the description and hit the little link to give StreamYard permission to show us who you are. Otherwise, we can see your comment, but we can't see your name. But we appreciate you and thank you so much for being here with us. Everybody agrees with your assessment of fashion. Emma Hopkins says the post-World War II new look is on point. Cheryl said the 50s fashion, yes.
Always.
And Angela said, yes, I love the fashion. The A-line dress, yes, styles are everything. I think those are so great. Yes, they had a lot. They are very forgiving. And she said her bridesmaids' dresses had a vintage 50s style. That sounds so cute. I love that. Miss Loretta says, I absolutely love these platforms. We readers are exposed to such phenomenal new authors. Woohoo. Thank you, Reese Ryan. So yes, I'm so glad. That's one of my favorite parts of this is being able to connect people. You know, a lot of times it's a writer that they're already familiar with, and that's great because you still get to meet them and know them in a deeper way.
Yeah.
But introducing people to a new author, you know, it's just like that's one of those things you love, like when you introduce somebody to a song or a musician or whatever, you're so excited that they like it too. So
and I think
hello
that's
to
why I write book reviews too, you know.
Yeah. Yes. So we're going to get into talking about this dual timeline. And Angela says, Denny, you nailed the dual timeline. I absolutely loved it. She said, I totally felt like I was in the middle of it and I still have a book hangover. I love that. And then let's see. Okay. And Midnight says, loved Wild Women in the Blues is an awesome story. I can now appreciate stories told in dual timelines. How is it writing them? So that's a great segue because we're about to get into discussing this whole thing about the dual timeline. So using the dual timeline, particularly in a debut novel, is freaking ambitious. But yet you were able to nail it. So at what point did you decide, tell us again, because you mentioned it earlier, but a few people have come in later. At what point did you decide to tell the story from a dual timeline? Was it from the outset, or did you attempt to tell it in a different way first and then decided to change it up?
Actually, this one came pretty quickly as an idea for a dual timeline. And part of that has to do with my passion. I love dual timelines. I love playing with time in storytelling. And so some of my favorite historical fiction dual timeline authors include Beatrice Williams, who does a beautiful job with her storytelling. Also Chanel Cleaton, amazing. Who else does it that I just I have a Fiona Davis. I'm gonna start showing some authors here. Fiona Davis.
Nice.
She has many books out, but a lot of people, well, those who have read Christian Hannah, The Nightingale, even though it's not a dual timeline, the way she uses time in that. Also Water for Elephants does.
Oh, I love that book. I have it behind me here somewhere. Yes. That's one of my favorite books.
Yeah. And
I love this so much. I haven't read it in a while, and I don't normally reread things just because I have so much of a TBR list. But this is definitely a favorite of mine. It surely is.
Yeah. And I guess I'm also talking about multiple timelines as well too, because you look at the thing that you look at first, I feel, is your POV character. Whose story is it?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the question I asked. And it's Honore's story. So in a modern or a more current timeline, what does that mean? How can I incorporate her story? And so I incorporated her, but I didn't want her POV in both timelines. So I said, since I know that my story has a lot to do with family interactions, because, actually Honore in 1925 is on her own, but her family is like a constant. Her parents are like a constant with her. on so many different levels. So I looked at that, and I looked at relationships with parents, if you will, for my character in the other timeline. Now, I've also, listened to people that are far more expert than me talking about their approach to writing. Kate Quinn is another person who does dual timelines, and you might be familiar with her with the Alice Network. Her most recent book, which is right over there, and I can't get up because I'm one of those Zoom people who don't need to stand up. It's called The Rose Code, another fabulous book. But if in looking at time as a story structure tool, you're able to do some different things. For example, you're able to sustain mystery. And what's the truth? Who's telling the truth? My next book, In the Face of the Sun, also has a dual timeline. But the next book after that, not the Other Princes, that's a lot of time. But the book after that will only take place over a 2-month period. But I have 3 POVs and how they connect and the time to get to that pivotal story point is what I'm striving for with that. Some other books that play with time, the Outlander series. And Walden does especially I'd grab Voyager, for example, but I think the second book does a brilliant job of that. The second book in the series, excuse me, very much puts the reader in a position of, well, what happened? How did we get here? From there, I think it's the one called Dragonfly in Amber. That's the one that really throws the reader off, and you really just have to read to find out. Now, another book that works with timelines brilliantly, and I just have to show this to somebody because this was a book I recently reviewed. Okay, wait a minute. Let me get this in there.
There you go. There you go.
Okay, you got to look at that. Okay, 100 pages. Anyway, I'm trying to be calm. 100 pages, and everyone is brilliant. I'm gonna tell you, this book is amazing.
Wow.
But she works time.
No, what's the name of that one?
It's called The Love Songs. Wait a minute. This is more literary.
There you go.
Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois.
Yeah.
And the author is Honore Jeffers. Isn't that funny? Her name is Honore.
Yes.
So I had to deal with that. But these books, this one I really do recommend it. The Love Songs. I recommend the Outlander series. I love Outlander. I was writing recaps before pandemic. I've been writing recaps of that for Stars for 3 or 4 years, seasons. And I don't know if I can go back to it because when they come back in 2022, because I'm on deadline. I'm on deadline.
Yeah.
So there you go. Looking at, and anybody, I mean, a lot of authors play in that multi-time zone. Because it offers mystery, structure. You're playing with story structure and looking at storytelling really puts you in a reader mindset. What is the reader's experience? And I loved working on Wild Women in the Blues, but I want to do more of them because you get better, and there's nothing wrong with saying you get better. And, but that is I just love that because in my original roots in storytelling, I was a fan fiction writer. before I
A
did
lot of
any.
authors have started with fan fiction.
Yeah, and I wrote Buffy Spike. I wrote Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So yes, I
I
did.
did not think you were going to say that.
I wrote a lot of it too. It was my relaxation when I was running a marketing and PR firm. I just come back home and just say, "Hey, let's hang out and write fanfic."
I
And
love it.
I got very much involved in that world. And I love fandom stuff. And that's
Yes.
probably why with Outlander, I, did what I've done in that fandom. And now I have another fandom that I'm not going to write any fanfic for it because they're about to put everything that I love, hopefully on the screen when they start the season. It's this TV show called New Amsterdam, and I am just like a huge fan of the show, but only because I started watching it 3 weeks ago. So I did this whole big thing, to clear my head from book whatever I was writing, and binged.
And since you mentioned Outlander, which is a book series, but has been made into a television show as well, with the dual timelines and stuff, you named several books that either have a dual timeline or they play with time, but also some movies do that as well. And so, like, there's two movies that, like, I really kind of fell in love with the way they played with time. And one was 21 Grams, which is a really heavy movie, but it's very good. 21 Grams. It's from a while back. I remember, I want to say Naomi Watts and maybe Benicio del Toro. I think those two are in it, but that's a really good one. It really plays with time, and like you said, it really hypes up the mystery of what's happened in the story. And another one is like this kind of on the other spectrum, that's kind of wild, is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which is, I believe, Jim Carrey and Kate Winslet.
Okay, I haven't seen that one.
Really, everything is just kind of out of order, and so you're like trying to piece it together as the story goes and stuff. And I love it. Right. I absolutely love that. So,
now, I'm going to tell you another one that plays with time and it's going to sound weird. It's Inception.
Yes. How did I not think of that? Yes, that one is wild.
Crazy time.
Not only does it play with time, it's just wild. I mean, I love it. I love the movie, but it is really deep and it's complicated and it's playing with time and all this stuff. And that's another one. That's another
one. Is, of course, Susanna Kersley. Oh my God, I'm reading something else by her right now, but she does a time thing that's beautifully done in one of her earlier books as well. I can't remember everything, I got too many books.
I know, like that's what I said. There's not enough room in here for everything. So I just, I save what I need to save, and then and I agree, 21 Grams was great. It's a heavy, deep movie, but it's a really good movie. Yes, I probably have one of those on DVD somewhere as well. So every now and then I'll pull those out. So let me ask you this next.
Somebody said that's Bible size.
Yes, that book you showed. Yes.
MF options. This thing is serious. Okay.
They're not playing. As Angela Anderson would say, they're giving you all the tea.
All of it. And it's every page is just lovely. She's originally an award-winning poet. This is her debut novel.
Wow.
Debut novel, 800 pages.
Wow. Well, look at you, Miss Debut Novel with the dual timeline. You know what
I'm saying? Okay.
So, what was your biggest challenge in telling the story from the point of view of two vastly different characters, and B, constructing the story in two separate timelines? What were the biggest challenges that you faced?
There were quite a few, because learning the craft of that dual timeline storytelling, you have two options. You can either write one story, then write the other story, then merge them together, or you can go back and forth. Some authors, if I remember correctly, I think I'm probably wrong on this, but I think Beatrice Williams said that she probably writes one story and then the other, and then maybe Kate Quinn said she writes, back and forth, or reverse, or reverse those authors. This has been a couple of years since I recall seeing this particular presentation, but man, there are a lot of things that are challenging, but some of them have to do with just being a first-time novelist. Somebody said that's a lot of reading.
Yes.
Let me back up. Because I'm like, every time we start talking about it, I have this, it's sort of like it comes back to me, the whole experience. But anywho, as I said, as a new novelist, some of the things that I was experiencing were just because I was new. Really going through a story and trying to match certain things, because you also, when you have a mystery that you're incorporating into the story, some of the things that you look at are the clues that you give and how much weight you put to those clues, and how much and voice is very important as well, because
especially when you have two wildly different characters like you do here. So
yes, but also what word choices, what will this character, and you can do that technically. You can do something like give character A a certain kind of word that they always say, and character B would never use that word or that phrase. And that's a way to differentiate. I had some people, because they don't understand the training of the romance writer, ask me about writing a male POV. And that's one thing that you, in the world of romance, you learn and are exposed to, because you must pay attention to beats, rhythms, how, if you make a deliberate decision that you're going to have a chatty man, that says a lot about his personality. That says a lot about who he is, because most of the time men are more reticent in terms of interaction. And so if you get that balance in between, you're saying something about character, as simple as that, and shorter sentences and things like that. I mean, literally, romance writers often are in classes where you're talking about the difference between a male voice on the page and a female voice on the page. Oh my God. Making sure you don't give away things too early. And I think I'm probably talking more about my second book right now, because my mind is so into that space. I mean, in terms of looking back at the process with Wild Women in the Blues, it was daunting. It was a daunting process, because it was a first book. It was, here I am trying to do this, that, and the other. I worked with separate editors, getting it ready to go on submission. Once it went on submission, I get feedback from my editor who's bought the book, which might change some elements of the story. Then you get line edits and all of these different factors, and you got to keep track of. When you write a complicated story, you got to keep track of a lot of things. And it's but at the same time, I'm a person who likes puzzles. I love a puzzle.
That I'm sure that helped a lot.
It really, but in being a puzzle lover, I think for the reader experience, which is I'm always trying to make sure I keep doing a better and better job, or keep that in the forefront of my goals, is what is that reader experience? What do you want their takeaway to be? What do you want them to feel? At the same time that I say that, I was surprised by so much that from the readers' feedback, that I was like, huh, because they loved the energy of the dance sequences. And for me, there are two types of performers. There are performers who, because I, as a former performer, there are people who don't see anything in front of, they don't see beyond the footlights. Everything is happening on the stage. And then there are performers who only see the audience. And that's who they're selling to. And both performances can be absolutely thrilling and exciting, but it's perspective. And so finding Honoree's place, Honoree loved the audience. She loved the audience. And then you have another character, Lula, and I can't remember that woman's name, Lula or Lulu. Anyway.
I thought it was Lulu, but maybe I'm wrong.
Lula, girl, this is what happens. They told me this. They said, you're going to forget.
Yeah, you're right. It's Lula.
Okay, thank you.
It's Lula. Because like I just saw it, I was like Lulu. In my head, automatically I just said Lulu. It's Lula.
Lula. And she's a person who is singing. She sings for that microphone. She's here. She's in a tighter space. And I like having people get connected to the music and the staging of the energy of the performances, being able to communicate that. I mean, that's something that even the Oprah, review or whatever it was said. It was like the environment. You really felt like you were in this bluesy space. And that was fun. That was fun to have that kind of feedback for the story.
I love that. I love that a lot. So, okay. Wow. Let me look real quick because, Mama Tony says, good evening and love the musical earrings. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. And I am nothing if not committed, because not only am I wearing musical earrings, but also am wearing a musical nose ring. So it's also it's also a T-Club.
I'll have a nose ring. I don't even know.
I'm committed to this.
Okay, I love it.
So, what are some tips or tricks that you would offer to someone who might feel like they want to do this ambitious undertaking of writing a story with a dual timeline?
Make a decision as to whether or not you're writing a mystery. Why are you using the dual timeline?
I like that first. Why?
Why are you doing it? Is it for mystery, for the purpose of keeping, telling two stories that eventually will connect? And frankly, anytime you do a dual timeline, those stories must connect. With my second book that I'm working on now, I have a character in 1928 and a character in 1968, but the stories are clearly connected because it's the same character at different stages, except she's not. In the 68 story, she's not the POV character. So I know why that was important to write that book in a dual timeline. It's a combination of the unpeeling the onion in the second book, because there's a big onion story and you want to know why, and then you have another story happening. But there's also, if you want to sustain mystery, and then identifying why you have two different POV characters. And what tense do you want them to talk in? There's another book right now that is doing really well that has a dual timeline, and it is called The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo.
I've seen that. Okay. I didn't realize it was dual timeline.
Right. And it's by Taylor something Reed. I have her books here someplace, but we're not going to look for them. And it's very purposeful, the two timelines and how they coincide and how they'll overlap and the whole purpose of that. So first step, why are you doing it? How does it impact your story? It must impact your story or don't do it.
Right.
Look at your turning points and make certain, as much as you can, this is my advice, and I believe it's pretty consistent with anyone who does dual timelines, make sure the turning points match up so that the reader is having emotional beats that are consistent. So first turning point happens for both characters, one chapter to the next. You're right there in that space. Midpoint, boom, right there in that space together. Crisis for both characters occurs in the same space in the story. Climax, etc. So that's another thing, turning points matching up. And if you can get through that far,
if that doesn't make you run away screaming.
yeah, you're not screaming yet. But picking place, that's another thing that I think can contribute. And what I mean by that, in Wild Women in the Blues, my 2015 character's POV is in first person present tense.
Yes, I noticed that.
It's immediate. It's right there on you because that's where I wanted his action to always be right there. Mm-hmm. You know, he knows nothing. So, yeah, that was pretty easy. He knows nothing. And then with the Honoré timeline, it's a close third past tense. And those are definitely decisions that you make as an author about how you're going to approach story.
Right.
And you have the flexibility to do any number of things within reason, especially as an early author. But I mean, the Rose Code is amazing because Kate, I think, has time periods that shift back and forth. So within a shorter period of time. And it's very effective because you're like, oh, you're here in this space. And she picks just the right character to carry that space in time while you go back and forth with the other characters. So it can be a lot of fun.
Yes. And you've given us so many examples of dual timeline stories to look at. So if you didn't get them all, I will at some point have my lovely assistant, Rachel, help us out by putting together a list of all the books that you mentioned, and I will update the description with that. As a matter of fact, I have to update a few shows with some book lists that she recommendation lists.
And I gave you dual timelines as well as multiple timelines.
Yes, anything that plays with time period, I think, so. And we've even mentioned some movies. So, hey, give a little bit of something for everybody. So, excellent advice. Thank you so much. So tell us, what can we expect next from you? Next, you've given us some ideas of what's going on. So give everybody a kind of a recap of what's coming next.
Quickly, as I said, my next book with Kensington is called In the Face of the Sun. That is actually a line from a Langston Hughes poem called Dream Variations. And it's another dual timeline, and it's set in 1928. And in 1968, it's the story of a young chambermaid at a brand new ritzy hotel in Los Angeles that was the first hotel upscale for African Americans only during 1920s, 30s and 40s probably. African Americans were not allowed to stay at the fancy hotels. And here you have Hollywood kicking off big time. You have musicians and actors and all of these people coming through town. And there was no place for them to stay. And so the Hotel Somerville opened in June of 1928. And so that's a part of the story. Meanwhile, in 1968, during early June, a couple of folks take off from Chicago on a road trip to LA. And LA is an important destination for everyone in the car. And they're in a candy apple red Mustang. The, the other book is The Other Princess, and I'm going to start working on that one for William Morrow, biographical fiction, and that's about Sarah Forbes Bonetta, who was a African princess, a young girl, 5 or 6, 7 years old, when she was rescued from enslavement by a British officer, and the way he had this girl, was able to get a hold of this girl, was to make her a gift to Queen Victoria. And so the young girl ends up in Britain, in Windsor Castle with the Queen and her family, and she has a lot of things that happen to her back and forth. And so I get to write that story. I'm very excited about that. And then I have a couple other books coming down the pike too. So I don't know.
You keep it nice and busy. I love it. I love it.
For 3 years.
That's awesome. Awesome. And again, the book we've been talking about is Wild Women in the Blues by our guest today, Denny S. Bryce. This is her debut novel, y'all. She went dual timeline on her debut. It might have taken her 7 years to write it, but it was worth it. And you learned a lot that you can then replicate in a shorter period of time, which you did with this next book that's coming out. When's the release date for In the Face of the Sun?
In the Face of the Sun is coming April 26, 2022.
Okay, so it's coming April 2022. Awesome.
Yeah,
awesome.
So in the world of books, it's right around the corner.
Fantastic. So tell people how they can connect with you online.
Oh, it's easy. Denny S. Bryce. That's my Instagram account. That's my Twitter account. That's my website, my social media. I'm pretty consistently active on Instagram and Twitter, and my Facebook account, same thing. Denny S. Bryce. Follow me, Denny S. Bryce, author. I need more people there. That'll help. I have my private face or my other Facebook page, and it's lots of folks, and I do a lot there too, but I'm trying to steer people toward the author page because it's starting to get a little crowded. But that's how you reach me, Denny S. Bryce. Take out that period and mush it all together.
Fantastic. And I do have the link in the description to Denny's website. And from there, you can probably find all her other social media. And again, we appreciate people who are consistent. So good job for being consistent from one platform to the next, because it makes it easier to find you. So thank you again so much for joining us today. Denny,
thank you for inviting me. This is fun.
It's been such a pleasure. And everybody enjoyed meeting you. So I am very excited. And Emma Hopkins said she heard of this gift to the Queen, the girl who was a gift to a queen. So we're definitely looking forward to seeing what you do with that and learning more about that story. So again, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye. That was author Denny S. Bryce. Again, author of Wild Women in the Blues. If you have not read this, so many people in the chat have already read it and absolutely loved it. So, and this cover is gorgeous, right? So make sure you get this book because it grabs you right away. So, thank you all for being with us today. Make sure you like the show and share it if you enjoyed it today. And if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. And the next show will be, I'm going to have a couple shows coming up in October. So if you subscribe, you'll see when they're coming up. Got special guests coming in October that I'm super excited about, but I don't want to tell y'all yet until we iron out the date for it and what have you. So, and like I said, don't forget that I will be on, or Karen, Joss, and I will be on the Brown book series, Shay Baby's channel, where if you like to talk to authors or meet authors, she talks to so many amazing authors. So you definitely want to check out her channel. She is at the bottom of my Facebook page and my recommended channel. She's the first one. So definitely do that. And like I said, pretty soon we'll be having the release of Just a Little Married. So if you haven't read the series yet, or if you want all 3 books signed, Love Sweet Arrow is going to have the box set of all 3 books signed, plus some other reader goodies, and those will be going out on Monday. So you still have time to, reserve your box set of the Moonlight Ridge series. So thank you so much, all of you, for being here with us this evening and for being a part of our lively discussion with Denny S. Bryce. I hope you read the book and check out some of the other dual timeline stories that she recommended. Like I said, Rachel will help us out by getting the list together, and I'll update the description of this as well as some other past shows where we've had book recommendation lists. So I'm going to be updating those. So thank you all so much for joining us, and happy reading.